is where the heart is, and my heart.
Believe that someone as warm, witty, and effortlessly charming as George Clooney could have carried around such strong feelings about his past. For decades, fans saw him as the man with the perfect smile, the easy laugh, and the heart of gold. He was the guy who could light up a room just by walking in. But behind that polished image was a history of moments and encounters that left him hurt, disappointed, and in some cases, outright angry. These weren't the quick grudges that faded overnight. They were feelings shaped by years of dealing with difficult personalities, backroom politics, and the cutthroat side of Hollywood most people never see. Clooney had stayed quiet for so long, perhaps because he didn't want to stir up drama, or because he thought it wouldn't change anything. But as time went on, he realized that some truths, no matter how uncomfortable, deserved to be spoken. This wasn't about revenge or gossip. It was about setting the record straight and letting the world know that even the most admired figures in show business have their share of regrets and enemies. The first name he brought up shocked even those who knew him best. It was someone he had once admired from afar, someone whose work he had respected long before they met in person. But that respect quickly turned to disappointment when Clooney discovered how different the reality was. On set, the person's ego dominated every scene. They treated others with a coldness that left the crew walking on eggshells, afraid to make even the smallest mistake. Clooney, who was always known for treating everyone equally, from the producers to the stagehands, couldn't stand that kind of arrogance. He tried to ignore it, focusing on the work, but every day brought a new reminder that some people let fame turn them into someone unrecognizable. He remembered a particular day when this actor snapped at a young assistant over something trivial, leaving the poor kid near tears. That was the breaking point for Clooney. From then on, he kept his distance, refusing to engage in anything beyond the bare minimum. He didn't want to waste energy on someone who saw kindness as weakness. Then came the story of another figure who had once been a friend. They had shared laughs, late-night talks, and even a few drinks after long filming days. Clooney thought they understood each other in a way only people in the same unpredictable industry could. But when a big opportunity came along, a project Clooney had been passionate about for years, that friend turned on him. Without warning, they maneuvered behind the scenes to secure the role for themselves, cutting Clooney out completely. It wasn't just the betrayal of losing the job, it was the betrayal of trust. He recalled finding out through a mutual acquaintance, who hesitated before telling him because they knew how much it would hurt. Clooney didn't yell, didn't make a scene. He simply walked away, refusing to give that person the satisfaction of seeing him broken. But deep down, he carried that wound for a long time, not because of the lost project, but because he had learned in the harshest way possible that not everyone who smiles at you is truly on your side. There was also the director he described as a nightmare in human form. Clooney had worked with tough directors before, people who demanded excellence and pushed everyone to give their best. He respected that kind of pressure when it came from a place of passion. But this director didn't care about passion. They thrived on belittling people, making cutting remarks in front of the whole crew just to assert their authority. Clooney remembered one rehearsal where an actress struggled with a scene. Instead of offering guidance, the director mocked her in front of everyone, saying she'd never make it in the industry if she couldn't get this simple moment right. Clooney stepped in, not to embarrass the director, but to protect the actress. That intervention created instant tension between him and the director, which lasted for the rest of the shoot. By the end, Clooney had sworn never to work with them again. No award or paycheck was worth putting up with that kind of toxic leadership. One of the most personal grievances Clooney shared wasn't about work at all. It was about family. In an industry where the lines between public and private life are constantly blurred, keeping family out of the spotlight can be exhausting. Clooney had always been fiercely protective of his loved ones, but there was one journalist turned entertainment figure who repeatedly crossed the line. They had gone after his family in a series of invasive stories, printing half-truths and outright fabrications just to get attention. Clooney had tried, more than once, to reason with them, asking for some measure of decency. But they laughed it off, claiming it was just business. For Clooney, it was personal, no matter how thick-skinned he had to be as an actor. Nothing prepared him for the helpless rage of seeing people he loved hurt by lies they couldn't defend themselves against. That was one grudge he admitted he'd probably carry for the rest of his life. The fifth name on Clooney's list was someone the public would never expect. A co-star from one of his most successful films. The chemistry between them on screen had been electric, so much so that fans assumed they were close in real life. But the truth, Clooney revealed, was that working with this person had been one of the most exhausting experiences of his career. They were competitive to the point of sabotage, constantly trying to one-up him in scenes, even if it meant breaking from the script or undermining the director's vision. Clooney didn't mind a little healthy competition, but this was different. It was personal. He remembered a moment during a press junket when they publicly downplayed his contribution to the film, making it seem as though he'd been little more than a supporting player. He laughed it off at the time, but inside, he knew they had crossed a line. And finally, the sixth and perhaps most painful story involved someone Clooney had once considered a mentor. This was a person who had helped him in the early days of his career, offering advice, making introductions, and opening doors that might have otherwise stayed closed. Clooney had looked up to them, thinking they shared the same values. But over time, he realized that their kindness came with strings attached. They expected loyalty, not the kind that comes from mutual respect, but the kind that demands silence when wrong is being done. Clooney reached a breaking point when he saw this mentor mistreating others in ways he could no longer ignore. When he spoke up, the relationship ended abruptly, and with it, a chapter of his life he had thought would last forever. Looking back, Clooney said, it was a lesson in the danger of putting people on pedestals. No matter how much someone has helped you, it doesn't excuse bad behavior. By the time he finished sharing these stories, it was clear this wasn't about bitterness. It was about honesty. Clooney wasn't trying to paint himself as a saint. He admitted he had made mistakes too. But he believed that staying silent about toxic behavior only allowed it to continue. Speaking out was his way of breaking that cycle, of reminding people that even in the glittering world of Hollywood, respect and decency matter just as much as talent and fame. And maybe, just maybe, by pulling back the curtain on his own experiences, he could inspire others to demand better, not just from the people around them, but from themselves. He talked about how strange it felt to say these things out loud after years of keeping them locked away. There had been moments in his career when speaking up might have cost him jobs, endorsements, or even friendships, and at the time, the risk seemed too great. But now, looking back, he realized the real risk had been in saying nothing at all. Every time he let someone's bad behavior slide, he was, in a way, giving it permission to continue. Every time he smiled politely in the face of arrogance or cruelty, he was telling himself it wasn't worth the fight. But the truth is, it had always been worth it. Not because confronting people would magically change them, but because doing so would have allowed him to live without the weight of knowing he had stayed silent when his voice might have made a difference. Clooney explained that Hollywood was a strange kind of battlefield. On the surface, it looked glamorous, full of red carpets, champagne toasts, and award shows where everyone seemed to adore one another. But behind closed doors, it was a place where egos clashed like swords, where trust was as fragile as glass, and where some people viewed kindness as a weakness to exploit. Over the years, he had learned to read the room quickly, to see who was there because they genuinely loved the work and who was there because they loved the power. It was an exhausting skill to develop, one that took away some of the magic he'd felt when he first started out. Yet it was also the reason he had survived for so long without losing himself completely. What surprised him most as he reflected on these experiences was how little the grudges were about revenge. He didn't sit at home thinking about how to get even. He wasn't waiting for some dramatic moment when his former co-stars or collaborators would come crawling back with apologies. Life didn't work that way, and he had no interest in reliving old wounds for the sake of personal satisfaction. Instead, his grudges were more like scars, reminders of battles fought and lessons learned. They were proof that he had endured, that he had walked through fire and come out the other side still standing, still able to smile, still able to love the work he did. In sharing these names, he wasn't trying to tell the world who to like or dislike. He wasn't putting himself in the position of a moral judge. What he wanted was for people, especially those just starting their careers, to know that it was okay to have boundaries. It was okay to walk away from people who made you feel small, no matter how important or influential they seemed. It was okay to protect yourself, even if others accused you of being difficult or ungrateful. Clooney had learned that the people who called you difficult for standing up for yourself were often the same people who benefited from your silence. There was also a deeper, more personal reason for finally speaking up: his own peace of mind. He admitted that in his younger years, he thought being easygoing meant letting things slide. He thought being the nice guy meant absorbing insults, forgiving betrayals, and laughing off disrespect. But as time went on, he realized that every unspoken word, every swallowed truth, stayed with him. It weighed him down in ways he couldn't always explain. By telling these stories now, by putting the truth into the open air, he felt lighter. It was as though he had been carrying bags of stones for decades and was finally setting them down. He also wanted to make it clear that none of this was about hating Hollywood. In fact, he still loved the industry. He loved the chaos of a film set, the creativity of working with people who saw the world differently, the thrill of watching a scene come to life in ways no one had expected. But he also loved the truth, and the truth was that not every part of the industry was worth celebrating. For every generous, hard-working, collaborative person he had met, there had been another who thrived on manipulation and fear. And as much as the public adored the idea of Hollywood as one big family, Clooney knew better. Families looked out for each other. Families lifted each other up. That wasn't always the case in the business he called home. Clooney closed his thoughts by talking about legacy, not the kind built on box office numbers or awards, but the kind built on how you treat people when no one is watching. He didn't want to be remembered just as an actor, or even as a successful one. He wanted to be remembered as someone who made the room feel lighter, who used his position to create opportunities instead of closing doors. And if telling the truth about a few people he couldn't stand helped clear the path for someone else, then he considered it worth every awkward headline or uncomfortable conversation that might follow. As the interview wrapped up, there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He seemed more at ease, almost relieved, as though saying these things out loud had been a long overdue exhale. You could see it in his posture. Shoulders that had been slightly tense at the start now sat lower, as if some invisible weight had slipped away. Even his smile was different. It wasn't the polite, practiced grin of a man used to cameras, but the quiet, genuine curve of someone who had finally told the truth and didn't regret it. There was no malice in his voice, no satisfaction in recounting the mistakes of others, no gloating over the fact that he had outlasted many of the people who had wronged him. That wasn't his style. Instead, what lingered was a calm, steady conviction that honesty, even when it came late, was better than silence that lasted forever. He admitted that speaking this way had not always been possible for him. In his earlier years, the risk of alienating powerful figures had kept him cautious. In an industry where reputations can change overnight and opportunities can vanish in a single phone call, It had felt safer to keep grievances tucked away. But safety had a cost. Over time, he realized that every unspoken truth had taken up space in his mind, filling it with a quiet, unshakable unease. It wasn't about keeping score or holding onto anger. It was about the way those memories had shaped him, even when he tried to ignore them. Talking now, openly and without fear, was a way of reclaiming that space for himself. What struck the people in the room most was the warmth that still came through in his words. Even when recalling moments of betrayal or cruelty, Clooney's tone never dipped into spite. It was as if he had come to terms with the fact that human flaws are part of the story, his own included. He didn't see these experiences as a reason to give up on people, but rather as a reminder to be more intentional about who he let into his inner circle. It was a balance between hope and realism, between knowing that kindness is worth protecting and recognizing that not everyone will honor it. In that moment, it became clear that this wasn't a man defined by the grudges he held. It was a man defined by the choice to no longer let them define him. That choice didn't erase the past, and it didn't make the difficult moments any less painful, but it reframed them. Instead of seeing himself as someone who had been wronged, he now saw himself as someone who had endured, learned, and kept moving forward. And maybe that was the quiet triumph hidden in his stories, not that he had exposed others, but that he had reached a place where the worst parts of his journey